He said he found it at a pawn shop. But I knew every scratch on that ring. I carved them myself. And when his wife raised her hand to fix her hair, I saw it, my past, shining on her finger. That evening, the sky looked like a painting someone had given up, on halfway gray, uncertain, unfinished. Tom's message came just as the first drops of rain began to fall. "Dinner at my place tonight. Been too long, brother." I hadn't seen him in almost 10 years. He was the kind of friend who once stood beside me at my wedding, his hand steady on my shoulder when I slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger. Back then, we promised to stay close, no matter where life took us. But life, it always finds a way to test promises. I looked at the message for a long time before replying. "Sure, I'll bring the wine." The drive to his house felt like traveling through time. The same winding roads, the same oak trees, bending over the wet pavement, but everything else had changed. My hair was grayer, my reflection colder. The man I used to be had been buried under years of silence. When I reached his place, the lights were already on. It was a modest 2-story house, not new, but cared for. The kind of place that still smelled of laughter. Tom opened the door before I could knock. "John Miller," he said, with that same grin I remembered from college. "Still late to everything, huh?" I handed him the bottle. Some things never change. He laughed, clapping my shoulder. "Good to have you here, man. It's been too long." His warmth was genuine, but there was something else, a shadow behind the smile. I couldn't name it yet, but I felt it immediately. Inside, the air smelled of rosemary and garlic. The dining table was set for 3. I glanced at the extra plate. "Expecting someone else?" I asked. Tom poured us each a glass of wine. "Yeah, my wife's just finishing up some work upstairs. You'll meet her soon." His wife. It sounded strange coming from his mouth. I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "I didn't know you'd gotten married." He shrugged. "A few years ago. You were hard to reach back then." He wasn't wrong. After Sarah left, I shut the world out. I had no appetite for congratulations or sympathy. We sat down. The rain outside turned heavier, tapping the windows like distant footsteps. Tom talked about work, about how the world had gotten faster, how people had stopped calling for the sake of calling. I listened, but part of me was still catching up to the idea that my best friend had a wife I'd never met. So he said suddenly, leaning back, "You ever find peace after all that?" He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. I took a sip of wine. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you learn to live with. He nodded thoughtfully, as if that sentence carried more weight than I meant it to. "Still the philosopher," he said, "always thinking too much." I smiled, faintly. "And you still pretending you don't." We laughed, a short, familiar sound that didn't quite fit anymore. He stood up to check the food, leaving me alone at the table. That's when I noticed something odd. On the sideboard near the dining wall was a framed photograph, Tom and his wife standing by a lake. She was wearing sunglasses, so I couldn't see her face clearly. but something about her posture, the curve of her smile, felt disturbingly familiar. I looked closer. My pulse quickened, though I didn't know why. Maybe it was the tilt of her head. Maybe the way Tom's arm rested protectively around her waist, the same way I used to hold Sarah when she got cold near the water. I blinked, forcing myself to look away. Coincidence, that's all. When Tom returned, he caught me glancing at the picture. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" he said proudly. "Changed everything for me." I nodded. "She looks kind." He smiled. "She is. You'll like her." A faint unease crawled up my spine. The kind that doesn't scream, it whispers. I took another sip of wine to drown it. Tom sat down again, the room filling with quiet music, something soft and slow from the 80s. He looked at me. "You know, you were right back then about what you said on your wedding day." I frowned. "What did I say?" He leaned back, grinning. "You said happiness isn't something you find. It's something you protect." I smiled faintly. "Did I say that?" "You did," he said, and I never forgot it. His tone was gentle, but his eyes, they carried a strange heaviness, like someone who's been living inside a secret too long. Then from upstairs, I heard footsteps, light, graceful. A woman's voice calling. "I'll be right down." Tom smiled. "There she is." I straightened in my chair without meaning to. I didn't know why my heart had begun to race, or why the rain outside suddenly sounded louder. When the footsteps reached the stairs, I caught a glimpse of a hand gripping the banister, slender, wearing a gold ring that gleamed under the chandelier. Something deep in me stirred. A recognition I didn't want. A memory I wasn't ready for. Tom poured more wine, oblivious to the shift in my breathing. "Wait till you meet her," he said. "She reminds me of someone you used to know." I smiled faintly, but my chest felt hollow. "I'm sure she does," I whispered. The table looked like it had been waiting for this dinner, polished. Oak candles, flickering steam rising from dishes that smelled like old memories. I sat across from Tom, the soft hum of rain filling the spaces between our words. We were halfway through our second glass when it happened. He reached for the salt, and as he did, something small slid from the edge of the serving tray and rolled across the wood, a tiny glint of gold that stopped near my hand. A ring. It rested there between us, catching the candlelight like a small, cruel joke. For a moment, I didn't breathe. Tom didn't notice. He was talking about his new job, how he finally managed to leave the firm that nearly broke him. His voice was cheerful, but all I could hear was the faint ringing in my ears. The ring gleamed again as the flame flickered. My eyes fixed on it, not out of curiosity, but recognition. Every line, every tiny imperfection in the gold looked too familiar. There, along the inner edge, was a faint scratch, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. A scratch I'd made myself. Years ago, when I was young and nervous, I'd dropped that ring onto the tiled floor the night before my wedding. It hit the corner of the sink, leaving a small mark I swore I'd polish later. I never did. That imperfection became its fingerprint. And now it sat there between two old friends like a ghost that had found its way home. "You okay, John?" Tom's voice snapped me back. I blinked, trying to look casual. "Yeah, just thinking." He chuckled. "You've been doing that your whole life." I smiled faintly. Maybe that's why I never learned how to stop. He picked up the ring, looked at it briefly, then shrugged. Sarah must have left it here after washing up. She misplaces it all the time." He placed it beside his wine glass, completely unaware of the storm it had just unleashed inside me. I nodded, forcing a polite tone. "Nice piece." "Yeah, she loves it. Says it fits her like it was made for her." I stared at the glass of wine in my hand. Maybe it was. He didn't catch the undertone. He kept talking something about how Sarah loved collecting vintage jewelry, how she found meaning in old things. But I wasn't really there anymore. My mind drifted back to a different table, a different night years ago. Sarah and I had sat under the soft glow of our kitchen lamp, her hands small and warm in mine. I had slipped that same ring onto her finger, whispering, "This isn't just a promise. It's a circle. No beginning, no end." She smiled then, that quiet, radiant smile I thought I'd never forget. And now, in this strange new house, that same ring sat inches away, worn by someone else. Tom poured more wine, his voice light. "You remember when we used to talk about forever?" I looked up. "Yeah. I remember thinking we'd both make it." He laughed. "We did in our own ways." I wanted to tell him, no, we didn't. We survived. That's not the same thing. Instead, I said nothing. The silence grew heavy again. The kind that makes people shift in their seats, unsure if they should fill it or let it echo. Tom finally broke it. "You still think about her sometimes?" There it was, the question people always circle, but never ask directly. I stared at the ring. "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly when I forget I shouldn't." He nodded quietly, his fingers brushing against the ring again as he reached for the bottle. "She hurt you bad, huh?" "It wasn't about hurt," I said softly. "It was about disappearing. One day she was there, the next, nothing." Tom looked down, his jaw tightening slightly. "Yeah, people vanish in different ways." That tone, sharp, regretful, lodged itself in my mind. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I didn't. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. The ring between us seemed to absorb the light, not reflect it. I reached for my glass again, pretending to be absorbed in the taste, but my eyes never left the ring. That scratch, the one I made, was there mocking me like a scar that refused to fade. A question pressed against my ribs. How did it get here? Tom's wife hadn't even come downstairs yet, and already her presence filled the room in ways I couldn't explain. "You'll like her," Tom said again, smiling faintly. "She's different. Gentle, but strong. Reminds me of someone you used to know." I swallowed hard. "You mentioned that earlier." He grinned. "Yeah, you'll see what I mean." The clock ticked quietly in the corner, the rain tapping in rhythm with it. I nodded slowly, setting the glass down. Maybe I already do. He didn't understand, but maybe it was better that way. A moment later, he stood to check the oven. The moment his back turned, I reached toward the ring. My fingers stopped just short of touching it. It felt wrong, like disturbing something sacred, something that didn't belong to me anymore. Still, I needed to know. I tilted it slightly under the candlelight, enough to see the faint engraving inside. 3 letters faded but unmistakable. J and S. My breath caught. The world around me blurred, the table, the room, even the sound of rain. It all fell away, leaving just me, that ring, and the quiet truth pulsing in my chest. I set it back down, my hand trembling slightly. When Tom turned around, I was smiling. But it wasn't happiness. It was defense. The kind of smile you wear when you realize you're standing at the edge of something that's about to fall apart again. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said softly. "I just remembered." "What's that?" I looked at the ring one last time. That some circles were never meant to close. The stairs creaked before she appeared. Soft footsteps. The faint rustle of silk brushing against wood. Then a voice, calm, clear, and painfully familiar. "Sorry for the wait. I didn't realize how late it was." Tom smiled instantly, his whole face lighting up the way a man's face only can when he loves the person he's about to see. And then she stepped into the room. Sarah. My Sarah. The world didn't shatter. It just stopped. The way a movie does when the film burns in the projector and the image freezes. She looked almost the same, a little older, a little softer around the eyes, but still carrying that quiet grace that once made entire rooms slow down. Her hair was shorter now, darker. She wore a beige dress, simple but elegant, and on her finger, that ring, the one I just stared at minutes ago. It glinted as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gold caught the light like it recognized me too. "Sarah," Tom said proudly, "this is John, the guy I told you about, my best friend back in college." Her eyes met mine. For a second, something flickered in them. Shock, recognition, maybe guilt. Then in the practiced calm of someone who has learned to live 2 lives. She smiled. "Of course," she said softly. "I've heard so much about you." I managed to stand, and about you. Her voice hadn't changed. Still that delicate blend of warmth and distance, like she could make anyone feel known and forgotten all at once. Tom clinked his glass. "2 old friends and new memories," he said. I raised mine, careful to keep my hand steady. "To whatever lasts," I replied. The clinking sound was soft, almost too soft, like even the glass understood how fragile this moment was. As we sat, Sarah took the seat across from me. Every gesture she made was familiar. The way she folded her napkin twice before setting it down, the way she tilted her head when listening. My mind screamed at me to look away, but my eyes refused. Tom poured wine for her. She smiled at him, touching his wrist. That small, tender gesture, I'd lived it before. I forced a breath. "So, sir," I said, my voice low, "how long Have you two been married? Almost, 5 years, she said. Feels longer, though. In a good way. Her words were calm, even kind, but something in her tone trembled. Tom beamed. She keeps me grounded. You know me. I'd lose my head without her. Yeah, I said quietly. I remember. She glanced up then, eyes searching mine, as if silently begging me not to say more. And I didn't. I wouldn't. Dinner carried on, laughter from Tom, polite responses from her, silence from me. The air grew heavier with every passing minute. Halfway through the meal, Tom excused himself to grab dessert. The moment he left the room, exhaled. Sarah set down her fork, her hand trembling slightly. She didn't look at me, just whispered, "You shouldn't have come." I leaned back. I didn't know you'd be here. Her eyes finally met mine, sharp, wet, terrified. Please, don't say anything. I looked down at the ring. You're wearing it. Her breath caught. It's just a ring. No, I said softly. It never was. She looked away, biting her lip. The candle light flickered across her face, showing the cracks behind her calm. I didn't plan this, she said. Life just happened. Life always does, I replied. The stairs creaked again, Tom's footsteps returning. And just like that, her mask returned. Her shoulders straightened. Her voice softened. Her eyes went silent. When he re-entered, she smiled. You made my favorite, she said, reaching for his hand. He laughed. Only because I'm terrified of what happens when I don't. They shared a light-hearted moment. I watched an outsider looking through glass at a life that once could have been mine. I sipped my wine slowly, trying to hide the tremor in my hand. Tom glanced at me. So what do you think of her? I set the glass down. She's unforgettable. He grinned. I told you so. The irony nearly choked me. We moved to the living room after dinner. Tom poured another round, and Sarah sat on the couch, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. The air smelled of oak and smoke and memory. She asked questions the kind polite people ask when they're pretending not to know the answers. You still in the same house? Still writing? I nodded, still pretending I'm okay. Tom laughed, thinking it was a joke. That's John for you. Always half philosopher, half poet. Sarah smiled faintly. He always was. Tom frowned. What do you mean? Her face went still. I mean, he sounds like one of those men you read about in books. Right, Tom said, chuckling again, not sensing the tension that wrapped around every word. The clock ticked behind us. Rain still fell outside, but softer now, like the world was listening. For the rest of the evening, I said little. I let Tom talk, let Sarah nod, and let my silence speak for me. Because what could I possibly say? That the woman sitting across from him was once the reason I believed in forever. When it was time to leave, Tom walked me to the door. We should do this more often, he said warmly. Maybe, I answered. Sarah appeared behind him, her arms folded. Our eyes met for one final, unbearable second. She didn't speak, didn't move. But her hand, the one wearing my ring, lifted slightly, like a silent apology. I stepped out into the cold rain. The door closed softly behind me. The night air felt cleaner than the one inside. I stood there on the porch, rain dripping down my hair, my face, my hands. For a brief moment, I almost reached into my coat pocket for what I don't know, maybe to feel the empty space where the ring used to rest when I still believed in promises. But I didn't. I just looked up at the sky, whispered to no one. It's funny how life gives back what you thought you'd lost, only to remind you it was never yours to keep. And then I walked away. The next morning, Tom called. He said they were planning a small get-together next weekend, just a few old friends. I said I'd think about it, though. We both knew I wouldn't. There are silences you can walk away from, and silences you carry with you. But that night, the night of the dinner, stayed behind my eyes like a photograph that refused to fade. I kept replaying it. The way she smiled. The way she looked at me as if nothing had ever happened. As if she'd never stood on our porch years ago whispering, "I need to find myself." Back then, I believed her. Now I knew sometimes people don't lose themselves. They just find someone else. I remember her smile most of all. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even fake. It was careful, the kind of smile built brick by brick over years of pretending the past was someone else's story. During dinner, she poured wine and asked about my writing. Her tone was warm, almost nostalgic. Tom watched her with that same proud admiration that once belonged to me. And that's when it hit me, the cruelest betrayals aren't the ones that shout. They're the ones that speak kindly. "You still write about people like us?" she asked softly. I met her gaze. Only when I forget how to stop. She smiled again, that same smile, polished and perfect. But I saw the tremor at the edge of it, the truth, trying to breathe through the cracks. Tom didn't notice. He was too busy telling a story from college, how I once fell asleep during an exam and still passed. Sarah laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years, and it cut through me like a memory trying to be reborn. When she leaned forward to pour more wine, the candlelight caught her ring. It glimmered against her skin, that same faint scratch near the edge. And in that moment I realized something she wasn't wearing it out of love or nostalgia. She was wearing it out of habit. The past had become jewelry, something she couldn't part with, but no longer believed in. I wanted to ask her why she kept it, why she never told him whose initials were inside. But instead I said nothing. Because sometimes silence tells the truth better than words. Tom looked up between us and laughed. "You two act like you've known each other forever." Sarah froze, just for a heartbeat. Then that smile again practiced serene, a wall built of politeness. "Maybe we have," she said lightly. He chuckled. "Well, now you really do." The air grew thin after that. The kind of thin you can't fill with small talk. So, we just sat there, three people, one secret, and a ring that had outlived its promises. Later that night, when dessert was done and the candles had melted halfway, Tom went to the kitchen to grab coffee. Sarah and I were alone again. She didn't look at me right away. Her eyes were fixed on the flicker of the candle, like she was afraid that if she blinked, the whole room would vanish. Finally, she whispered, "He doesn't know." I figured, I said, She knotted her fingers, tightening around her glass. Please, John, whatever you think you know, just let it stay buried. I studied her face, older, wiser, but still carrying the same softness that had once made me believe people don't leave. They just get lost. Does it haunt you? I asked quietly. Her lips parted. Every day. Then it's not buried, I said. She looked at me, then really looked. For a brief moment, the woman I knew was there again. Not Tom's wife. Not the stranger in the beige dress. Just Sarah, the woman who used to sit on our porch steps, laughing into the wind. You think you've moved on? She whispered. Until you realize you've just been walking in circles. I nodded. Some circles never close. The door creaked. Tom returning. Sarah straightened intently, her expression resetting to warmth. He handed her a cup. You two look serious. Should I be jealous? She laughed, light and effortless. Not unless you're jealous of philosophy. He chuckled. Then I'm safe. Her hand brushed his, a quiet reassurance that belonged to him now, not me. And yet, watching them, I felt no rage, just an odd, calm clarity. Love doesn't die when it's betrayed. It simply changes shape into understanding, into distance, into something quieter than forgiveness. When I left, she followed me to the door. Tom stayed behind, humming an old song. Sarah spoke first. Her voice was barely audible over the rain. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know. Then why does it still hurt? I gave a faint smile. Because meaning doesn't erase memory. She looked down at the ring, twisting it slowly. He thinks it's new. I know. I couldn't throw it away, she said. It felt wrong. Keeping it wasn't right either. Her eyes glistened. What would you have done? I would have kept the memory, I said softly, and buried the symbol. A flash of pain crossed her face. Maybe I don't know how. I wanted to tell her that none of us do. That moving on isn't an act, it's a lifetime. But I didn't. Some truths sound cruel when spoken aloud. Tom's voice echoed faintly from inside Sarah. Everything okay? She wiped her eyes quickly and forced one last smile, that same perfect, guarded smile. Yes, everything's fine. And as she closed the door behind her, I finally understood what made her smile so haunting. It wasn't joy. It wasn't peace. It was survival. When I reached my car, the reflection of the porch light shimmered on the wet windshield, a small golden circle. For a moment, it looked like the ring again. Then a raindrop struck it, breaking the circle in half. I sat there watching it fade and whispered, even light can't hold a promise forever. The next week, Tom invited me back. I told myself I shouldn't go, but curiosity has a cruel way of disguising itself as closure. And maybe part of me wanted to see if it was all real. When I arrived, Sarah wasn't home. Tom greeted me with his usual grin, motioning toward the kitchen. You're early. I was just making coffee. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans and rain-soaked wood. On the counter sat the same ring glinting under the overhead light, like it belonged there. I tried not to look at it, but Tom noticed. You like that, huh? He said, picking it up. Sarah never takes it off, but she said it's been loose lately. He twirled it between his fingers, studying it with a kind of casual affection that felt unearned. Funny story, actually. I found this at a pawn shop years ago. Cheap, too. Thought it'd make a good surprise. My pulse stuttered. A pawn shop? He nodded. Downtown. One of those dusty little places you only go to once. I was looking for a watch, but this caught my eye. There was something about it, you know, that feeling. When something seems familiar. I forced a smile. Yeah, I know it well. He laughed. Well, turns out Sarah loved it. I guess it fits her right. He slipped it halfway onto his pinky, admiring how the light caught it. Almost feels like it was made for her. I stared at the engraving inside. Maybe it was. He didn't notice the edge in my voice. Oh man, you wouldn't believe how she reacted when I gave it to her. Said she'd never take it off. Guess it's good luck. Or bad, I murmured. He frowned. What was that? Nothing, just... It's rare for something used to mean the same thing twice. Tom tilted his head, a puzzled smile forming. You always talk in riddles. Maybe I've lived too long with things I can't explain, I said. He chuckled again and went back to his coffee. But my eyes stayed on that ring, on the faint scratch that no pawn shop story could erase. We sat in the living room afterward. The rain had returned gentle this time. Tom handed me a mug and leaned back in his chair. You ever think about fate, John? Too often. He nodded. I used to think everything was random, that people meet by chance. But lately, I don't know. Feels like things happen for a reason. I studied him for a long time. And what reason do you think this happened? He looked up confused. What do you mean? I gestured toward the ring still on the table. You hear that ring. The way all these pieces somehow found each other again. He shrugged. Maybe that's what's beautiful about life. Things get lost, and they find their way back, even if they don't belong where they end up. He laughed softly. You're still the philosopher, huh? I didn't answer. Because beneath his laugh, I heard something, the kind of uncertainty that lives under guilt. Later, Sarah came home. She looked surprised to see me, though she masked it well. I didn't know you were coming, she said. Neither did I replied. Tom smiled proudly. We were just, talking about your ring. Her face went pale, just for an instant. Then she smiled that same practiced composure. Oh, what about it? I was telling him how I found it at that pawn shop years ago, Tom said. Funny coincidence, huh? Sarah froze. Her eyes darted to mine just long enough for me to see the panic flicker there. Then she exhaled quietly and said yes. Quite the coincidence. Tom didn't notice. He was already back to stirring sugar into his coffee. But in that silence between us, I heard everything she didn't say. I didn't sell it. I lost it. Or maybe I let it go. Her gaze lingered on the ring a second too long. Then she picked it up, slipping it back onto her finger, and turned away. Her hand trembled barely. We sat there, three ghosts pretending to be alive. Tom talked about work. I nodded. Sarah laughed in the right places. But under the laughter, the truth pulsed like a heartbeat. At one point, Tom leaned back, grinning contentedly. You know, John, sometimes I think we were meant to meet when we did. She healed me. Sarah's eyes closed for a moment. as if holding her breath under the weight of his words. Maybe I said. Or maybe she just reminded you of something you were trying to forget. He looked at me, puzzled. What do you mean? People don't heal us, I said quietly. They just make our wounds quieter. He nodded slowly, as if he wanted to agree but didn't understand. Sarah stood excusing herself. I'll bring dessert. Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the word dessert. When she left, Tom turned to me. You ever think she looks familiar? I met his eyes. All the time. He chuckled. Guess she's got one of those faces. Maybe she's got one of those souls, I said softly. He raised his eyebrows, amused. You've changed, man. Maybe not enough. When Sarah returned, she carried a plate of sliced cake lemon, her favorite. The smell whooped to me like a memory. Tom leaned over, grinning. She baked it herself. Can you believe it? I smiled faintly. Yeah, I can. Sarah avoided my eyes. The silence between us grew again thick and suffocating. Finally, I stood. Thanks for the coffee and the story. Tom looked surprised. Already stay a little longer. I shook my head. Well, no, I think I've heard enough for today. He laughed. What, my pawnshop tale scared you off? I smiled, something like that. As I turned to leave, Sarah followed me with her eyes. The kind of look that tries to hold on, but knows it can't. Her hand brushed the ring, again thumb tracing the engraving, like a prayer she could never say aloud. At the door, Tom called out, Next time, bring that old wisdom of yours. Sarah says it makes her think. I looked back once. Be careful with thinking, Tom. It makes people see what's been there all along. He laughed it off, but she didn't. And as the door closed, I caught one last glimpse of her standing in the hallway, still touching the ring, her face half hidden in shadow. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world felt washed clean. But inside me, the dirt had only begun to stir. Because I realized something cruelly simple. The ring wasn't what haunted me. It was the story they told, to make it make sense. And maybe that's all betrayal ever is, a beautiful lie told to keep the truth from breaking too loud. That night I couldn't sleep. The sound of rain against my window sounded just like it did that night years ago, when I first held her hand and promised forever. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, but it tasted like memory. So I sat by the window instead, watching the streetlights flicker, and somewhere between one breath and the next, I was back there again. It was summer. The kind of day that makes you believe in eternity. The sea was calm, the sky a soft shade of gold, and she stood barefoot on the sand, her dress catching the wind like a whisper. Sarah. We had chosen a quiet beach for the ceremony. No church, no crowd, just us two friends as witnesses and the sound of waves. Tom was there too. He joked that I was making the biggest mistake of my life, then handed me the ring box like he was passing a secret between brothers. Don't drop it, he said with a grin. I did. It slipped from me nervous fingers and hit the corner of the sink in the small beach house bathroom. When I picked it up, a small dent glinted at the edge. I cursed under my breath, but Sarah laughed. "It's perfect," she said. "Now it's ours. Imperfect like people." That's when I knew she was the one. Because she didn't need perfection. She only needed truth. I remember the way her hand trembled when I placed the ring on her finger. The gold caught the sunlight, and she whispered, "For better or worse." I said it back, but louder. Maybe too loud, because I wanted the world to hear. Tom clapped behind us, whistling. "Well, Miller, you did it. You actually found someone who can stand you." Sarah laughed, pulling him into a hug. "He's not that bad." Tom grinned. "You'll learn." I didn't notice it then, the way his smile lingered a little too long, or how his eyes softened when she looked at him. Maybe love always leaves footprints even before it walks away. We spent the first few years building a life that felt like a secret. Quiet mornings, long walks, laughter in the kitchen. I used to write in those days essays about love, about time, about how two people could become a single silence. And she would sit nearby reading drafts, sometimes marking them with her neat handwriting, "Too cold, add warmth." When I read those old pages now, I realize she wasn't talking about the writing. She was talking about me. The first cracks appeared after her mother passed. She withdrew into herself, speaking less, sleeping less. I tried to hold her, but some griefs can't be held. They just live in the room with you, like a ghost that refuses to leave. Then one morning she was gone. Her closet half empty, the coffee still warm. On the table, a note. "I need to find myself before I can love you again." I read that sentence until it stopped meaning anything. For weeks, I waited. Months turned into years. And when I finally stopped hoping, I did what men like me always do. I folded the memory and placed it somewhere quiet. But I never threw it away. Now, sitting there decades later, I realized how cruel time could be. It doesn't heal, it just changes what hurts. The whiskey glass felt cold in my hand. The street outside blurred through the rain. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered, "She didn't leave. She just took the part of you that still believed." I closed my eyes. In the darkness behind my eyelids, the wedding replayed again, but this time slower. The moment I slid the ring on her finger, I noticed Tom standing behind her. He was smiling, but there was something in his eyes, not envy, not sadness, something quieter, a kind of longing too polite to speak. Had it always been there? Had I been too blinded by happiness to see it? The memory shifted again the last night before she left. We sat by the fireplace arguing about something small. I don't even remember what it was. But I remember how her hands shook when she said, "You make everything so calm, John. Sometimes I need a storm." At the time, I thought it was a metaphor. Now I think she meant it. The clock on my desk ticked back into focus. The rain had stopped. The world was silent again, except for the echo of vows that no longer belonged to anyone. I got up, walked to the drawer, and pulled out the small velvet box I'd kept all these years. It was empty, of course. Just the imprint of where the ring used to rest. I ran my thumb across the dent, inside the one I'd made. I could still feel it, like memory had weight. "It's perfect," she had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe imperfection was the only proof that something real had existed. The next day I drove past the old pawn shop downtown. It was still there, faded sign, dusty window. Through the glass, I saw rows of forgotten objects, watches, lockets, wedding bands. Each one a story someone had stopped telling. For a moment I imagined walking in, asking the man behind the counter about that ring. But what would I even say? "Excuse me, do you remember who traded away a promise?" No. Some truths don't need to be reclaimed. They just need to be understood. That night as I sat back down at my desk, I opened a new page in my notebook. And I wrote, "Love doesn't die when it ends. It dies when it's forgotten. And sometimes the only way to remember it is to see it living in someone else's story." The ink bled slightly into the paper. Outside, the rain returned soft, steady, forgiving. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fix anything. Because I finally understood some circles aren't meant to close. They're meant to stay open so the light can get in. The next time I saw them together, it was by accident. I was walking downtown, rain threatening to fall again, when I spotted them through the window of a cafe, Tom leaning forward laughing, and Sarah brushing something from his collar. The moment froze. It wasn't jealousy that gripped me. It was clarity, brutal, cold, final. They looked happy. Not perfect, not radiant, just quietly content. And somehow, that hurt more than betrayal ever could. I watched for a moment longer than I should have, then turned away. Some truths aren't meant to be confronted. They're meant to be understood. That night, Tom called. He sounded lighter than usual, almost proud. "John, I've been thinking," he said. "We should go fishing next month, just the two of us, like old times." I smiled faintly. "Like old times," I repeated. "You okay, man? You sound distant." "Just tired," I said. He hesitated. "You ever think about how weird life is? How it all circles back?" "Yeah," I murmured. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately." A week later, I accepted his invitation to dinner again. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to see if they'd slip, if guilt would finally show itself. But when I arrived, there was no guilt, just laughter, music, a life that didn't include me anymore. They welcomed me in as if nothing had ever happened, and maybe in their minds nothing had. Tom was pouring drinks. Sarah was setting the table. And I was watching ghosts pretend to be people. At one point, Tom told a story from years ago. The beach, the wedding, the ring. He laughed, glancing at Sarah. "You know, I was there when he got married. Never thought I'd be the one still married at this age, huh?" Sarah froze for half a second, then smiled. Life's strange like that. Tom raised his glass. 2 second chances. I raised mine too, but the words tasted bitter. Second chances, I echoed. Or recycled mistakes. He laughed. thinking I was joking. Sarah didn't. Her eyes met mine, calm, pleading, almost grateful that I hadn't said more. Later that evening, after dinner, we sat by the fire. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the windows. Tom leaned back, glass in hand, content. You know, he said, Sarah doesn't talk much about her past. Says there's nothing worth remembering. I turned toward her. She didn't look up, just kept staring at the fire. Her fingers toyed with the ring slowly, deliberately. Maybe, I said quietly, the past isn't something you talk about. Maybe it's something you wear until you forget it's there. The silence that followed was so sharp, I could hear the firewood crack. Tom smiled, not understanding. Sarah's hand stilled. For the first time that night, her eyes lifted to mine, and everything that needed to be said was there. Regret, shame, love. That had no place left to go. Tom stood to pour more drinks, humming an old song. Sarah exhaled barely a whisper. Why didn't you ever ask me why I left? I didn't look at her. Because I thought I knew. You think it was about him? No, I said. It was about you. She nodded slowly, eyes shimmering in the firelight. You always saw too much. I turned toward her then. And you always ran when someone did. The words weren't uncruel. They were true, stripped bare of bitterness. She blinked back, ooming tears. I never wanted to hurt you. You did it anyway. Her voice cracked. And I've been paying for it ever since. By pretend. By our. Tom came back, breaking the fragile spell. What did I miss? Sarah smiled, instantly perfect. Composure restored. Just catching up on old times. He handed me a glass. Man, it's good to have you around again. Yeah, I said softly. It's good to see what time does to people. People laughed. Makes us wiser, right? I looked into my glass. Or quieter. When I left that night, I didn't say goodbye. I just stepped into the rain and let it wash everything away. The lies, the love, the noise, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold. I stood there, feeling the water soak through my coat. And for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. Because in that silence, I finally understood something. I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at myself for believing love was supposed to last just because I wanted it to. People change. Love shifts. Rings move from one hand to another, and the world keeps turning like nothing happened. When I reached my car, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, lonelier, but not bitter. And behind me, faintly, through the rain-streaked glass of their living room, I saw them laughing again. Sarah's head rested on Tom's shoulder. The ring sparkled faintly, catching the firelight. It didn't belong to me anymore. Maybe it never did. I smiled, not out of forgiveness, but understanding. Some things I whispered are meant to be lost. Otherwise, we'd never learn how to let go. The rain softened. The streetlights glowed warm against the mist. And as I walked away, the sound of my footsteps disappeared into the quiet, not heavy, not hollow, just human. That was the moment I stopped chasing closure. Because closure isn't something you find. It's something you accept in the silence between what was and what still hurts. The rain came again that night, steady, patient, like an old friend, knocking on a door I'd stopped opening. I sat in the car outside their house, headlights off the streetlights bleeding gold across the windshield. Through the window, I could see faint silhouettes, moving laughter, movement, life. For a long time, I just sat there, not watching them, watching myself, what I had become. A man who once believed promises were eternal, now sitting quietly at the edge of someone else's forever. I thought about knocking, about saying something, anything. But words felt useless now. The truth didn't need to be said. It had already happened. The next morning, Tom called again. He sounded cheerful, almost carefree. "Sarah says we should have you over again soon," he said. "She thinks you've been lonely." I smiled to myself. She always did think too much. "You sure you're okay, man? You sound distant lately." "I'm fine," I said, just realizing how quiet life can get when you finally stop chasing noise. He laughed, not understanding. "You and your quotes. Maybe I've just run out of questions," I said softly. After we hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time, feeling something close to peace. Fragile, uncertain, but real. That evening, I wrote a letter I'd never send. "Dear Sarah, you were right. Life doesn't end when love does. It just changes shape, becomes something softer, sadder, but still alive. If you ever wonder whether I hate you, I don't. I only wish you'd left the ring behind so I could bury what we were instead of watching it live on another hand." I folded the letter, slipped it into a drawer, and let it stay there, a quiet tombstone for the part of me that still waited. Days passed. Weeks blurred. I began walking again, long, aimless walks through the park, where leaves gathered like old memories at my feet. There was a bench near the pond where couples often sat. One evening, I saw a young man drop to one knee, trembling, holding a ring toward a woman who gasped and cried. The people around them clapped. I just stood there smiling, not bitter, not broken, just older, because I finally understood what the young never do. Love isn't measured by how tightly you hold on. It's measured by how gently you can let go. A few months later, I saw Tom again by chance. He was at the hardware store comparing paint colors. He waved when he saw me, that same grin, still easy, still warm. "John Bean forever. Sarah's outside in the car. You should come say hi." I hesitated, then nodded. Sure. When I reached the car, the window rolled down. Sarah sat there, the ring still shining faintly on her finger. She looked different. Tired, maybe, or at peace. Sometimes those two things look the same. "Hi, John," she said softly. "Hi, how have you been?" "Lighter," I said. "You?" She smiled faintly, still learning. We stared at each other for a long moment, the kind only people with unfinished histories can share. Then she said I kept it because I couldn't forget what it meant, not because I still wear what it was. I nodded. Maybe that's enough. She looked down at her hand. "You don't hate me, do you?" "I did," I said, until I realized I was only hating the echo. Her eyes softened. "You always were better with silence." And you, I said, always filled it beautifully. She smiled then, not the careful, rehearsed smile I'd seen at dinner. This one was smaller, honest. When Tom came out, she turned to wave, and I saw the ring catch sunlight one last time. It didn't hurt anymore. It just existed, a small golden truth that belonged to time, now not to me. That night I went home and opened the window. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. I took out the empty ring box one last time. For years it had been a wound. Now it felt like a relic. I placed it gently on the table and whispered, "You served your purpose." Then I blew out the candle beside it. The room fell into half darkness, half warm, half cold, like my life had always been. And in that soft twilight, I understood something final. We don't lose people when they leave. We lose them when we stop understanding why they did. Weeks later, I visited the ocean again, the same beach where we once said forever. The wind was colder. Now the sea rougher, but the sound of the waves still carried the same rhythm, as if time had been keeping my secrets all along. I sat on the sand watching the tide erase my footprints faster than I could make them, and for a moment I felt her beside me, laughing barefoot, alive in memory. "It's perfect," she had said that day. And maybe she was right, because imperfection was the only thing that ever made it real. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small plain ring I'd bought from a street vendor the week before, not to replace the old one, but to remind myself that meaning isn't trapped in gold. It's in the story we tell ourselves when it's gone. I tossed it gently into the sea. The waves swallowed it without resistance, and just like that, the weight left my chest. That night I wrote again, not a letter this time, just words. For the first time in years, they came easily. Forgiveness isn't about others. It's about no longer letting what hurt you keep writing your story. I closed the notebook, feeling the quiet settle. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the rain. Inside, the silence felt warm again, no longer punishment, but peace. I poured myself a final drink, raised it toward the window, and whispered, "To imperfection, to what we lost, to what still remains." As I turned off the light, I caught my reflection in the glass, older, calmer, maybe even content. The man looking back wasn't waiting for anything anymore. He was simply there, alive, aware, and finally free of what he once called forever. The rain tapped gently on the window, as if applauding the quiet. And in that silence, I smiled, not out of sadness, not out of triumph, but because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. Final stoic line. Signature close. Some loves don't die. They just change hands. And when they do, the wisest thing we can do is to bow our heads and let them go with grace.